The monitor screamed first. A flat, piercing electronic wail that cut through the hum of the recovery ward like a blade through silk, and Celeste Sterling's eyes snapped open to the sight of 3 nurses sprinting past her bed, their shoes screeching against the polished floor of St. Victoria Medical Center. Her body was still trembling from the anesthesia. Her abdomen throbbed beneath the fresh incision. And somewhere down that sterile white hallway, one of her newborn triplets was fighting for a heartbeat. She tried to sit up. Pain exploded through her midsection, and a firm hand pressed her back down against the pillow. "Mrs. Holloway, you need to stay still," the nurse said, her voice tight with practice calm. "You just had major surgery 6 hours ago." "My babies," Celeste rasped, her throat raw from the breathing tube they'd removed only that morning. "Where are my babies?" "They are being monitored in the NICU. Dr. Bennett is with them right now." Celeste's hands shook as she gripped the bed rail, trying to force her body upright despite the pain screaming through every nerve. She had carried 3 lives inside her for 31 weeks. She had felt them kick, felt them hiccup, felt them turn in the middle of the night when she couldn't sleep. And now, hours after an emergency delivery that nearly took her own life along with theirs, she was lying in a hospital bed unable to even walk to see if they were alive. That was when the door opened. She expected Dr. Bennett. She expected a nurse with an update. She expected anyone in scrubs. Instead, she saw her husband. Adrian Holloway stood in the doorway wearing a charcoal suit so crisp it looked like he'd stepped out of a boardroom rather than rushed to a hospital where his wife had nearly died giving birth to his children. His tie was perfectly knotted. His hair was combed without a single strand out of place. He did not look like a man who had spent the night worrying. He looked like a man who had spent the night rehearsing. "Adrian," Celeste breathed, relief flooding through her despite everything. "Thank God. Have you seen them? Have you seen the babies?" He didn't answer right away. He crossed the room with slow, measured steps, the kind of walk a man uses when he wants every second to count, and he set a manila folder on the rolling tray beside her bed. Not on the nightstand. Not in her hands. On the tray. Directly in her line of sight, the way you'd set down a menu. "I need you to sign these," he said. Celeste blinked, her mind still fogged from medication, and looked down at the folder. Thick. Official. A red tab marked urgent along the edge. "Sign what?" "Adrian, what is this? Have you even seen our children?" "I saw them," he said flatly. "They're in incubators. The doctors are handling it." "Handling it." "Adrian, one of them is turning blue in there." Dr. Bennett said Sebastian's oxygen levels. "I know what Dr. Bennett said." His voice was clipped, businesslike, the same tone he used when dismissing an underperforming department head. "I need you to focus on what's in front of you." With 2 fingers, he flipped the folder open himself. Celeste's breath caught in her throat. Divorce papers. Her name. His name. The date. A dissolution of marriage filed with the Cook County Circuit Court, drafted with the kind of precision that told her this hadn't been written in a moment of panic. This had been prepared, reviewed, perfected, while she was in surgery fighting to keep 3 babies alive. Her husband had been sitting with lawyers, choosing his words. "You're joking," she whispered. "Tell me this is a joke." "I don't joke about business." "This isn't business, Adrian. This is our marriage. This is our children lying in incubators right now, and you're standing here with divorce papers instead of asking if they're going to live." His jaw tightened, the only crack in his otherwise flawless composure. "Our marriage ended months ago, Celeste. I'm simply making it official." "Months ago?" Her voice cracked. "We had dinner 2 weeks ago. You held my hand at the anatomy scan. You told the ultrasound tech you couldn't wait to meet them." "People say things," he said, "to keep the peace." She stared at him, searching his face for some trace of the man she married 8 years ago, the man who used to leave notes in her coat pockets before board meetings, the man who cried the first time they heard 3 separate heartbeats on the monitor. She found nothing. Just a stranger in an expensive suit, standing over a hospital bed with a pen already uncapped in his hand. That was when she saw her. Monica Voss stepped into the doorway behind him, arms crossed, dressed in a tailored cream blazer that probably cost more than a month of NICU care. She didn't come inside. She didn't need to. She simply stood there, watching, a faint smile playing at the corner of her mouth, and the diamond earrings glittering beneath the fluorescent lights caught Celeste's eye immediately. Celeste knew those earrings. She had bought them herself 18 months ago, a Christmas gift for Adrian's assistant. A courtesy, a kindness, a thank you for years of loyal service. Monica tilted her head slightly, and the earrings caught the light again, and in that single silent gesture, Celeste understood everything. "How long?" she asked quietly. Adrian didn't flinch. "That's not relevant right now." "How long, Adrian?" "Sign the papers, Celeste. I just gave birth to your children." Her voice broke, tears spilling hot down her cheeks, and every part of her body screamed in protest as she tried to push herself upright. "3 of them. Emergency C-section. I almost died on that table. And you want me to sign divorce papers before I've even held them?" "The company can't afford instability right now," he said, as though reciting a line from an earnings call. "Investors are watching. A messy personal situation reflects poorly on Holloway Biotech's leadership. It's cleaner if we resolve this quickly." "Cleaner?" She let out a broken, disbelieving laugh. "You're worried about optics while your children are fighting for their lives. I'm worried about our future." "There's no our future. There's apparently only yours." He set the pen down on the folder, beside the signature line, and for the first time he looked almost bored, the way a man looks when a meeting has run 5 minutes past its scheduled end. "I'll give you a few days to think it over. But Celeste, don't make this harder than it needs to be." He turned and walked toward the door, and Monica stepped aside to let him pass, her heels clicking against the tile in perfect rhythm with his. Neither of them looked back. As the door swung shut, Celeste heard Monica's voice, low, satisfied, meant to carry just far enough. "Well, did she sign it?" "She will," Adrian said. "She always does what's practical eventually." The door clicked shut, and Celeste was alone with the folder, the monitor's fading echo of alarms still ringing in her ears, and 3 tiny hearts somewhere down the hall that she couldn't hold, couldn't comfort, couldn't even see. She picked up the folder with trembling hands and hurled it across the room. Papers scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. And then she wept, not the soft, quiet tears of heartbreak, but the deep, guttural sobs of a woman who had just watched her entire life collapse in the span of 4 minutes, while her body was still healing from bringing 3 lives into the world. She didn't know yet that this was only the beginning. She didn't know that within 72 hours, security would escort her from the very NICU where her children lay fighting to survive. She didn't know that Adrian would tell a judge she was unfit, unstable, a danger to her own newborns. She didn't know that somewhere across the city, in a vault few people even knew existed, her father had left behind a weapon more powerful than anything Adrian Holloway could ever build. All she knew, in that moment, was that the man she loved had just tried to erase her while she was too weak to fight back. She was wrong about one thing, though. She was never as powerless as he believed. By morning, Celeste had convinced a nurse to wheel her to the NICU despite her doctor's protests, refusing every offer of a wheelchair alarm or a sedative, gripping the 4-pole beside her like a lifeline as she shuffled down the corridor in a hospital gown, stitches pulling with every step. Through the glass, she saw them for the first time. 3 incubators, 3 tiny bodies, each no bigger than a loaf of bread, tangled in wires and tubes that seemed impossibly large against their fragile skin. Sebastian, the firstborn, had a small tube taped beneath his nose, his chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths. Olivia, the second, lay under a bilirubin light, her tiny fists curled beside her face. And Theo, the last, the smallest of the 3, was hooked to a monitor that beeped with unsettling irregularity. "Mrs. Holloway." Celeste turned to see a woman in a white coat approaching, her expression carrying the particular gentleness reserved for delivering hard news. Dr. Naomi Bennett, head of neonatal medicine, had kind eyes but a guarded posture, the look of someone who had learned to brace herself before every conversation with a parent. "Please," Celeste whispered, "tell me the truth. All of it." Dr. Bennett nodded slowly. "Sebastian has a congenital heart defect. We caught it on the echo this morning. It's serious, but treatable, if we act quickly." Olivia's lungs weren't fully developed at delivery. She's on respiratory support, and we're watching her closely. And Theo, she hesitated. Theo is the one I'm most concerned about. There are early signs of intracranial pressure. We need to run an MRI today to know more. Celeste's knees nearly buckled. She gripped the four-pole tighter. What do they need? Tell me what they need, and I'll get it. Whatever it costs. That's the issue, Mrs. Holloway. Dr. Bennett's voice dropped. These procedures require authorization. And your husband's office called this morning. What did he say? He instructed us to hold off on the more invasive interventions. He said he wanted a second opinion before authorizing what he called. She glanced down at her tablet, reading verbatim, unnecessary experimental expenses. The words hit Celeste like a physical blow. Unnecessary. He called saving our children's lives unnecessary. I'm telling you because I think you have a right to know, Dr. Bennett said carefully. But legally, as things stand, his authorization carries weight. Your name is still on the insurance and consent forms, but there was an amendment filed late last night. Emergency temporary guardianship, citing concerns about your mental state post-delivery. Celeste felt the floor tilt beneath her. He filed for guardianship. Already? I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you needed to hear right now. Celeste pressed her palm against the glass separating her from her children, watching Theo's chest rise and fall in short, labored breaths, and something inside her that had been breaking all night suddenly hardened into something else entirely. Not despair. Resolve. He is not taking my children from me, she said quietly. He is not going to stand in a courtroom and call me unfit while our son needs surgery. I don't care what it takes. I will fight him with everything I have left. Dr. Bennett studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Then I suggest you find a very good lawyer. Fast. She didn't have to look far. That evening, as Celeste sat alone in her hospital room, staring at the ceiling and replaying every warning sign she'd ignored over the past year. The late nights, the sudden business trips, the way Adrian had started locking his phone even at home. There was a soft knock at the door. An elderly man stepped inside, silver-haired, dressed in a simple gray suit that seemed almost deliberately unremarkable, carrying a leather briefcase that looked older than Celeste herself. She recognized him instantly, though it had been years since she'd seen him. Theodore, she whispered. Theodore Briggs. Hello, Celeste. His voice was warm, weathered, carrying the particular gravity of a man who had spent decades keeping other people's secrets. I'm sorry it's taken me this long to come. I had to be certain. Certain of what? He pulled a chair beside her bed and sat, setting the briefcase across his knees. Certain that what's happening to you now is exactly what your father feared might happen one day. Celeste's chest tightened. Her father, Richard Sterling, had died 4 years ago, or so she'd been told, so the funeral and the will and the closed casket had suggested. She had spent those 4 years believing she had nothing left of him but memories and a modest inheritance. Adrian had insisted she sign over to a joint account for simplicity. What are you talking about? She asked. Theodore looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing exactly how much truth she could bear in a single night. Your father planned for this day. The words hung in the air between them, and Celeste felt something shift, some tectonic plate beneath her entire understanding of her own life beginning to move. Theodore, I don't understand. My father left me a small trust. Everything else went to charity, to the company's succession plan, too. That is what you were told, Theodore said gently. That is what Adrian was told, too. It is not the truth. He opened the briefcase and withdrew a single sealed envelope, its wax seal embossed with a Sterling family crest, a symbol Celeste hadn't seen since she was a little girl running through the halls of her father's estate on Lake Michigan. Your father never abandoned you to a modest life, Celeste. He built something far larger than anyone outside this room knows. And he built a way to protect it, and you, in case someone ever tried to take advantage of you while you were vulnerable. Celeste stared at the envelope, her hands trembling as she reached for it. What is it? The truth, Theodore said simply. About Sterling Global Industries. About the company that quietly owns nearly 40% of Holloway Biotech's operating capital. About a protocol your father designed 20 years ago and refined every year since, waiting for a day he hoped would never come. Celeste broke the seal with shaking fingers. Inside was a single document, printed on heavy cream paper, headed with 3 words that would change the course of everything that followed. Legacy Directive 7. "What is this?" she whispered. Theodore's eyes softened with something between sorrow and quiet pride. "It's the reason Adrian Holloway has no idea who he actually married. And it's about to become the reason he loses everything." Over the next hour, Theodore explained what he could, though he was careful, deliberate, choosing each word as though he were diffusing something volatile. Richard Sterling had not simply been a wealthy industrialist. He had built Sterling Global Industries from a single manufacturing plant into a diversified holding company with stakes in pharmaceuticals, logistics, real estate, and biotechnology, including, unbeknownst to nearly everyone, a controlling minority position in Holloway Biotech Corporation itself, acquired quietly through a labyrinth of shell entities almost a decade before Celeste ever met Adrian. "Your father believed in protecting his family the way he protected his companies," Theodore said, quietly, structurally, so that no single person, no husband, no board member, no rival, could ever exploit you without triggering consequences they never saw coming. "Why didn't he tell me?" Celeste asked, her voice small. "Because the moment you knew, you would have had to carry it. And he wanted you to have a normal life for as long as possible. He wanted you to fall in love without calculating whether the man loved you or your name." Theodore's expression darkened. He was not naive, Celeste. He suspected, even in his final years, that someone might come along who valued the empire more than the woman. Celeste closed her eyes, thinking of Adrian's face as he set the divorce papers on her hospital tray, thinking of the calm, businesslike tone in his voice as he talked about optics and cleaner resolutions. Had he known, even then, had some part of him always been circling her, waiting? "The trust holding Sterling Global's controlling shares," Theodore continued, "has remained dormant since your father's death, managed by a shell board designed to look unremarkable. It cannot be touched, sold, or diluted by anyone. Not by executives, not by courts, not even by you, under ordinary circumstances. Then how does it help me now?" "Because it isn't ordinary circumstances, Celeste. Legacy Directive 7 contains an activation clause. If credible evidence emerges that the sole heir, you, is being medically coerced, financially defrauded, or legally manipulated while vulnerable, the directive activates automatically. Full executive authority across every Sterling-affiliated holding transfers to a pre-appointed guardian of the trust." He met her eyes. "Me?" Celeste sat in stunned silence. "Adrian filed for emergency guardianship over you less than 12 hours after you delivered under general anesthesia," Theodore said. "He is currently attempting to block critical medical treatment for your children while citing your alleged instability. He has hospital records, court filings, and a documented pattern of financial control. Celeste, this is precisely the scenario your father built Legacy Directive 7 to counter." "So activate it," Celeste said, her voice suddenly steady, sharpened by something she hadn't felt in months. Not since before the wedding, before the years of small compromises that had slowly hollowed her out. "Activate it right now." Theodore allowed himself the faintest smile. "It's already begun. The moment you opened that envelope and acknowledged the contents in the presence of a Sterling family attorney, the clock started. Within 72 hours, every subsidiary tied to Sterling Global will begin transitioning executive authority. Adrian Holloway does not yet realize that his company's very solvency depends on capital his own wife's family controls. And the babies," Celeste said, her voice cracking. "Sebastian's heart, Theo's brain. Can this help them right now, tonight, before it's too late? The trust has emergency medical provisions specifically for situations like this," Theodore said. "I can authorize full coverage and override any hold placed by Adrian within the hour. Dr. Bennett will have everything she needs before morning." Tears filled Celeste's eyes, but for the first time since the divorce papers had landed on her hospital tray, they weren't tears of despair. "Do it," she whispered. save my children, and then help me take back everything he thinks is already won. If this story has you sitting on the edge of your seat, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because what happens next is going to shock you. Adrian has no idea what's coming for him. Drop a comment below and tell me, do you think Monica will stay loyal to Adrian, or will she turn on him the moment things fall apart? Now, back to the story. By dawn, everything had changed inside St. Victoria Medical Center, though almost no one understood why. Dr. Bennett arrived for her rounds to find every prior authorization hold lifted, replaced by a blanket approval from an entity she'd never heard of, Sterling Global Medical Trust, with instructions to proceed with any and all interventions necessary for the Holloway triplets, cost no object, effective immediately. She stood in the hallway outside the NICU, staring at her tablet in disbelief, then walked briskly to Celeste's room. Mrs. Holloway, I don't know what happened overnight, but every restriction on your children's treatment has been lifted. We can operate on Sebastian's heart this morning. We're scheduling Theo's MRI within the hour. Celeste, still weak but sitting upright now, allowed herself the first real breath she'd taken in 2 days. Do it. Do everything he needs. There's something else. Dr. Bennett hesitated. Your husband's office called an hour ago, demanding to know why the previous hold was removed without his authorization. I told him the funding source had changed. He didn't take it well. I imagine he didn't, Celeste said quietly. By 10 that morning, Sebastian was in surgery, a team of pediatric cardiac specialists, flown in overnight from Northwestern Memorial on a private jet chartered by a mysterious benefactor, working to repair the defect in his tiny heart. Celeste sat in the family waiting area, Theodore beside her, both of them silent, both of them praying in their own ways. It was there that Adrian found her. He stormed through the double doors, tie loosened, hair no longer perfectly combed, the composed executive from 2 days earlier replaced by something rawer, angrier. What did you do? He demanded. Celeste looked up at him calmly. I saved our son's life. Something you refused to do. I refused because those procedures cost hundreds of thousands of dollars for experimental treatments with no guaranteed outcome. I was being responsible. You were being cheap, Celeste said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. There's a difference, Adrian. One is about protecting a company's balance sheet. The other is about protecting a human being. You chose the balance sheet. Who authorized this? His eyes darted to Theodore. Who is this? Theodore Briggs, Theodore said calmly, extending a hand Adrian did not take. Attorney for the Sterling Family Trust. Sterling Family Trust. Adrian repeated, something flickering behind his eyes. Not recognition exactly, but the first faint stirrings of unease. Celeste's father died years ago. Whatever trickle-down inheritance she has isn't nearly enough to cover what I just watched get authorized on that chart. You'd be surprised, Theodore said mildly, what you don't know about your own company's ownership structure. Adrian's jaw tightened. What is that supposed to mean? It means, Celeste said, rising slowly to her feet, ignoring the ache in her abdomen, that you should call your CFO. Ask him who really controls 40% of Holloway Biotech's operating capital. Ask him why. As of 6 this morning, several of those accounts suddenly required dual authorization from an external trustee. She watched the color drain from his face in real time. Watched the arrogant certainty that had defined every interaction between them for the past 2 days finally begin to crack. You're bluffing, he said, though his voice had lost its earlier confidence. Call him, Celeste said. I'll wait. Adrian's hands curled into fists at his sides. For a moment, Celeste thought he might actually make the call right there in the waiting room, in front of Theodore, in front of the nurses passing back and forth with clipboards. Instead, he turned and walked away without another word, his footsteps echoing down the hallway, no longer measured and confident, but hurried, almost frantic. Theodore watched him go, then turned to Celeste with a small, knowing smile. Is about to have a very interesting phone call, he said. The phone call, as it turned out, was more than interesting. It was catastrophic. Adrian sat in his corner office on the 40th floor of Holloway Biotech's downtown headquarters that afternoon, staring at his laptop screen as his CFO, a nervous man named Gerald Pruitt, tried to explain what had happened to their operating accounts. "I don't understand it, sir," Gerald stammered. "Every account tied to the Meridian Capital Fund now requires secondary authorization. And Meridian's ultimate parent entity is," he swallowed hard, "it's Sterling Global Industries." "Sterling Global," Adrian repeated slowly, the name tasting foreign and wrong in his mouth. "As in Celeste's father's company?" "Yes, sir. It appears Sterling Global has held indirect majority influence over Meridian Capital, our largest institutional investor, for approximately 9 years. We've always operated under the assumption that Meridian was independent." 9 years, Adrian said quietly. "That means Sterling Global has had leverage over our funding since before Celeste and I were even engaged." "It would appear so, sir." Adrian closed his eyes, pieces beginning to assemble in his mind with sickening clarity. The venture funding that had seemed to appear so effortlessly during the company's early expansion. The board seats that always seemed to go uncontested. The regulatory approvals that moved faster than industry norms. He had spent a decade believing he'd built Holloway Biotech through sheer brilliance and ambition. Now he was starting to wonder how much of it had simply been handed to him, quietly, invisibly, by a father-in-law who had never once revealed his hand. "Get Monica in here," he said abruptly. Monica arrived within minutes, her expression carefully neutral, though Adrian could see the tension in the set of her shoulders. "You wanted to see me. Did you know about this?" he demanded. "Sterling Global, Meridian Capital, any of it? Know about what?" "Don't play games with me, Monica. Celeste's family apparently controls a significant piece of this company's funding, and I need to know if anyone on my executive team knew before this morning." "I had no idea," Monica said, and something in her tone made Adrian search her face more carefully. "Adrian, if this is true, if her family really has this kind of leverage, we need to handle this delicately. Very delicately. I've already filed for guardianship. I've already filed for divorce. What exactly do you suggest? That I crawl back into that hospital room and apologize?" "I suggest," Monica said carefully, "that you find out exactly how much power this trust actually has before you do anything else that might be irreversible." For the first time since this began, Adrian felt something he wasn't accustomed to feeling. Fear. That evening, as Sebastian recovered from a successful surgery in the NICU, his tiny chest now bearing a fresh line of stitches but his heart beating in a steady, healthy rhythm for the first time since birth, Theodore returned to Celeste's room carrying a thin folder of updated documents. "The transition is proceeding faster than anticipated," he said, settling into the chair beside her bed. "By tomorrow morning, Legacy Directive 7 will have fully activated across every Sterling-affiliated entity. That includes formal removal of Adrian's access to any Holloway Biotech accounts funded through Meridian Capital." "He'll fight it," Celeste said. "You saw his face in that waiting room. He's not going to accept losing control without a war." "I expect he will fight," Theodore agreed. "Men like Adrian Holloway rarely go quietly. He'll likely attempt to discredit the trust's legitimacy, challenge it in court, perhaps even attempt to discredit you personally to undermine your standing as the rightful heir." "Let him try," Celeste said, and there was a new hardness in her voice, something forged in the sleepless nights of watching her children fight for their lives while their father calculated the cost of saving them. "I am done being underestimated, Theodore. I am done being someone men talk over, talk around, talk down to. My father built an empire and hid it inside my name because he knew, someday, I might need it. That day is here." Theodore studied her for a long moment, something like pride softening the lines of his weathered face. "Your father always said you were the strongest of his children. He said it a long time before anyone believed you'd ever need to prove it." Celeste's breath caught. "Children? Theodore, I don't have siblings. I'm an only child." Theodore's expression shifted, the careful mask of a lawyer accustomed to controlling information slipping for just a moment. "There's something else I need to tell you, Celeste. Something I wasn't planning to reveal so soon. But given everything happening now, I think you deserve the truth." "What is it?" 20 years ago, your family suffered a tragedy the public never fully learned about. Your brother, Elias, was believed dead after a kidnapping that your father kept almost entirely out of the press to protect the company's stock price and your own safety as a child. Celeste stared at him, the room seeming to tilt around her. I had a brother. You did. You do. Theodore's voice was gentle but resolute. Because, Celeste, we never found a body. And 2 days ago, an anonymous entity began quietly acquiring millions of dollars in Holloway biotech shares through an obscure offshore account. An account with encryption signatures that match a security protocol only 3 people in this world would know how to replicate. Who are the 3 people? Your father, who is deceased. Myself. And whoever taught Elias Sterling those protocols himself before he vanished 20 years ago. Theodore leaned forward, his eyes intense. Someone is buying their way into Adrian Holloway's company, Celeste. Someone with resources, patience, and knowledge that should have died with your brother 2 decades ago. Celeste pressed a hand against her chest, feeling her heart pound beneath her palm, feeling the impossible collision of grief and hope crash through her all at once. Is it him? She whispered. Is my brother alive? Theodore's silence was answer enough. We're about to find out, he said finally. And so, I suspect, is Adrian. 3 days later, Sebastian's heart continued to heal. Olivia's lungs strengthened enough for her to breathe without assistance, and Theo's swelling had begun to subside under careful monitoring. Small miracles that Celeste credited entirely to a medical team no longer shackled by her husband's cost-cutting demands. But the peace was short-lived. On the 4th morning, 2 hospital security guards arrived at Celeste's door alongside a woman from Patient Advocacy Services, their expressions apologetic but firm. Mrs. Holloway, the woman said carefully, I'm sorry, but we've received an emergency court order. Effective immediately, you're to be escorted from the NICU pending a psychiatric evaluation. Your husband's legal team filed documentation this morning citing concerns about. Concerns about what? Celeste demanded, already pushing herself upright, ignoring the protest of her healing body. Postpartum psychosis, the woman said quietly. There's an affidavit from a Dr. Marcus Weiss stating he examined you 2 days ago and observed symptoms consistent with. I have never seen a Dr. Marcus Weiss in my life, Celeste snapped. I have not been examined by any psychiatrist. This is fabricated. I understand this is distressing, Mrs. Holloway, but the order is signed by a judge. We're required to comply. Celeste's hands trembled with fury and disbelief as the security guards stepped forward, their postures apologetic but unmoving. You cannot take me away from my children. They just had surgery. They need me. I'm sorry, the woman repeated. And though her voice carried genuine regret, it changed nothing about what was happening. As the guard gently but firmly guided her toward the elevator, Celeste caught one final glimpse through the NICU window. Sebastian's small chest rising and falling steadily, Olivia's tiny fist curled against her cheek, Theo's monitor beeping its slow, reassuring rhythm, and she felt something break inside her that she knew would take more than time to heal. Down the hallway, unseen, Adrian watched from behind a corner, arms crossed, a look of grim satisfaction settling over his features as security escorted his wife away from their children. He didn't yet know about Elias. He didn't yet know that the boardroom coup he'd just orchestrated would collapse within the week. He didn't yet know that somewhere in that hospital, a legal directive 20 years in the making had already begun tightening around him like a noose. All he knew, in that moment, was that he had won. He was wrong. Celeste sat in a small, windowless consultation room 3 floors below the NICU. Her hospital gown replaced with borrowed scrubs, her wrists free of restraints but her spirit feeling more shackled than it ever had in her life. Across from her sat a woman with a clipboard and a badge that read Dr. Patricia Lang, staff psychiatrist. Mrs. Holloway, I want you to know this evaluation is standard procedure whenever a formal concern is raised, Dr. Lang said, her tone professionally gentle. I've reviewed the affidavit submitted by your husband's legal team. I have to ask you some questions. Ask them, Celeste said, her voice flat with exhaustion and fury. Ask me anything you want. I have nothing to hide because none of this is real. I have never met a Dr. Marcus Weiss. I have never exhibited a single symptom this so-called affidavit describes. Dr. Lang studied her for a long moment, then set down her pen. Mrs. Holloway, may I speak candidly? Please. I pulled the state medical board registry before this session. There is no licensed psychiatrist named Marcus Weiss practicing in the state of Illinois. The signature on that affidavit doesn't match any registered credential I could locate. She leaned forward. I don't know what's happening in your marriage, Mrs. Holloway, but based on everything I'm observing right now, your affect, your coherence, your clarity, I see no clinical basis for the concerns raised in that filing. Frankly, I see a woman who just survived an emergency C-section, watched her newborns fight for their lives, and is now being dragged through a legal nightmare by someone who appears to be fabricating evidence. Relief crashed through Celeste so violently she nearly wept. Then tell them. Tell the judge. Tell whoever needs to hear it. I will document my findings in full, Dr. Lang said. But Mrs. Holloway, I need you to understand something. Fraudulent affidavits, fake medical credentials, forged signatures. This isn't just unethical. This is criminal. If what I'm seeing is accurate, someone committed felony fraud to have you removed from your own children's medical decisions. His name is Adrian Holloway, Celeste said quietly. And I promise you, Doctor, this is only the beginning of what he's capable of. While Celeste sat in that consultation room reclaiming her sanity on paper, 17 floors above the city, Dr. Naomi Bennett stood in her office reviewing something that made her blood run cold. She had pulled Theo's medical file to prepare for his afternoon MRI when she noticed a discrepancy, a treatment note timestamped 2 days earlier, describing a neurological assessment that had never actually taken place. The note was detailed, clinical, convincing. It documented a physician's observation of Theo exhibiting minimal responsiveness consistent with severe, potentially irreversible neurological damage, a finding that would have justified withdrawing aggressive treatment entirely. The physician listed on the note was Dr. Marcus Weiss, the same name on Celeste's fraudulent psychiatric affidavit. Dr. Bennett's hands were shaking as she pulled up the digital audit trail, tracing the note's origin through the hospital's record system. It had been uploaded from an external terminal, authorized using login credentials belonging to a hospital administrator named Frank Delgado, a man Dr. Bennett vaguely recognized as having joined the billing department only 3 months earlier, around the same time Adrian Holloway had made a substantial administrative modernization donation to the hospital. She picked up her phone and called hospital security. I need you to pull employment records for Frank Delgado in billing, she said. And I need to speak with hospital counsel immediately. I think someone has been falsifying medical records inside this facility. By the time Celeste returned to the NICU that evening, cleared of any psychiatric concerns and quietly furious at the machine of lies that had been constructed against her, Dr. Bennett was waiting with a look of grim urgency. We need to talk, Dr. Bennett said, pulling her aside. Someone falsified a neurological assessment on Theo's chart. The same name that appeared on your psychiatric evaluation, Marcus Weiss, also appears on a fabricated note recommending we withdraw aggressive treatment for your son. Celeste felt the floor drop out from under her. Withdraw treatment? You mean he tried to? I mean someone tried to manufacture a medical justification to let your son's condition deteriorate without intervention, Dr. Bennett said, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. I've already reported this to hospital administration and legal counsel. This goes beyond a custody dispute, Mrs. Holloway. This is attempted falsification of medical records with potentially fatal consequences for a newborn. Celeste pressed both hands over her mouth, horror and fury colliding inside her chest. He would let Theo die, she whispered. He would let our son die to win a custody case and protect his stock price. I don't know his motivations, Dr. Bennett said carefully, but I know what the evidence shows. And I know that as of an hour ago, hospital administration contacted the Chicago Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. This is now a criminal matter. Celeste closed her eyes, images flooding through her. Adrian's calm face as he set divorce papers on her hospital tray. His cold recitation about unnecessary experimental expenses, the satisfaction on his face as security escorted her away from the NICU. She had known he was capable of cruelty. She hadn't fully understood, until this moment, exactly how far he was willing to go. "Good," she said finally, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "Let them investigate everything. Let them find every lie he's told." 2 days later, the fragile balance of power shifted again. This time inside the walls of Holloway Biotech's downtown headquarters, where Adrian sat at the head of a hastily assembled board meeting, trying desperately to project the confidence of a man still in control. "I understand there have been concerning developments regarding the Sterling Family Trust's activity," he began, addressing 11 board members seated around the mahogany table. "But I want to assure everyone that this is a temporary complication. My legal team is already challenging the validity of whatever mechanism has been triggered. We expect full resolution within." The conference room doors opened. A man Adrian didn't recognize walked in, tall, composed, dressed in an understated navy suit that somehow commanded more attention than Adrian's tailored charcoal ever had. He moved with the unhurried confidence of someone who had never once doubted his right to be in the room. "I'm sorry to interrupt," the man said, his voice calm, almost pleasant. "But I believe this meeting concerns my family's holdings." "Who are you?" Adrian demanded. "This is a private board session." "My name is Elias Sterling," the man said, and the room fell utterly silent. "I believe several of you knew my father, Richard, and I believe all of you are about to become very familiar with me." Adrian's face drained of color. "Elias Sterling died 20 years ago." "Clearly," Elias said, a faint, humorless smile touching his lips. "I did not." He walked to the head of the table opposite Adrian and set down a slim leather folder. "I've spent the last several years quietly acquiring shares in this company through independent channels, entirely separate from my family's existing holdings. As of yesterday morning, combined with the assets now under Legacy Directive 7's control, I represent a controlling interest in Holloway Biotech Corporation." "That's impossible," Adrian said, though his voice had lost all its earlier authority. "This is a hostile takeover. I'll challenge this in court. You'll do nothing of the sort," Theodore Briggs said, stepping into the room behind Elias, his presence quiet but absolute. "Because everything Elias has done complies fully with SEC regulations, fully documented, fully legal. Unlike, say, filing fraudulent psychiatric affidavits under a fabricated physician's credentials, or falsifying a newborn's neurological assessment to justify withholding treatment. Both of which, I'm told, are now under active investigation by the Chicago Police Department's Financial Crimes Division." The color that had drained from Adrian's face was replaced by something closer to panic. Around the table, board members who moments earlier had been nodding along with his reassurances now exchanged uneasy glances, several quietly sliding their chairs a few inches further from his end of the table. "This is a coordinated attack," Adrian said, his voice rising. "My wife, her family, all of you. This is a conspiracy to steal my company." "Your company," Elias repeated softly, "has depended on my family's capital since before you married my sister. You didn't build an empire, Mr. Holloway. You borrowed one, and now it's time to give it back. If you're loving this story, hit that like button right now. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is exactly the moment to do it, because Adrian's downfall is only just beginning. Comment below and tell me, what do you think Monica does next? Does she stand by Adrian, or does she save herself? Let's get back to the story. Monica Voss watched the board meeting collapse from the back corner of the room, her carefully composed expression cracking with each passing minute. And by the time Elias Sterling finished speaking, she understood with perfect clarity that the man she had aligned herself with was no longer the man in control of anything. She found Adrian alone in his office that evening, staring blankly out at the city skyline, a half-empty glass of scotch sweating on his desk. "We need to talk," she said. "Not now, Monica." "Yes, now." She closed the door behind her. "Adrian, I have recordings. Recordings of you discussing the falsified psychiatric affidavit. Recordings of you instructing Frank Delgado to alter Theo's medical chart. Recordings of you telling me, and I quote, 'If the trust activates, we bury Celeste in litigation until she signs whatever we put in front of her.'" Adrian turned slowly, his eyes narrowing. "Why would you have those recordings?" Because I've survived in corporate America for 15 years by never fully trusting anyone, Monica said, her voice cold and clear. Including you. Especially you. You're threatening me. I'm protecting myself, she corrected. The Financial Crimes Unit is already investigating the medical fraud. It's a matter of time before they subpoena internal communications. And when they do, I am not going down as your accomplice, Adrian. I have already spoken with a federal prosecutor. Adrian's glass slipped from his fingers and shattered against the hardwood floor. You went to the feds. Behind my back. I went to the feds to save myself, Monica said, unflinching. Forged signatures. Falsified custody documents. Manipulated medical records. And unless my lawyer has misread the situation entirely, insider trading tied to your early knowledge of Sterling Global's involvement in Meridian Capital. She met his eyes without a trace of the warmth that had once passed between them. I'm not loyal to you, Adrian. I never was. I was loyal to winning. And you just became the losing side. She turned and walked out, leaving him alone amid shattered glass and the ruins of everything he had spent a decade building. The federal agents arrived 3 days later, on a gray Tuesday morning, walking through the polished lobby of Holloway Biotech's headquarters with a calm, procedural efficiency that made the moment feel almost anticlimactic after everything that had led to it. Adrian was in a meeting when they arrived, still trying, even then, to salvage some fragment of control, still drafting talking points for a press conference he would never deliver, when 2 agents flanked by hospital security and Chicago PD detectives stepped into the room. Adrian Holloway, one agent said, holding up a badge, "You're under arrest for medical fraud, falsification of records, forgery, and securities fraud related to insider trading. You have the right to remain silent." The room fell into stunned silence as Adrian rose slowly from his chair, his face a mask of disbelief even as the words settled around him like a verdict already rendered. Board members who had spent the past decade praising his brilliance now watched in horrified fascination as agents guided him toward the elevator, hands cuffed behind his back. News helicopters, tipped off hours earlier by an anonymous source, circled the building by the time Adrian was led out through the front entrance, and by evening, every major Chicago news outlet was running the same footage on a loop. The once celebrated CEO of Holloway Biotech, the man who had graced magazine covers as a visionary of modern medicine, being placed into the back of an unmarked sedan while cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions he would never answer. Celeste watched the footage from a hospital room, Theodore seated quietly beside her, and felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a hollow, exhausted relief that the war, at least the public part of it, was finally over. "It's done," Theodore said softly. "It's not done," Celeste replied, her eyes still fixed on the screen. "Not until my children are home. Not until they are safe." As if summoned by her words, her phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Bennett. "Theo's latest scan shows significant improvement. Swelling nearly resolved. Sebastian's heart function is stable and strong. Olivia is off respiratory support entirely. Come see them. They are waiting for their mother." Celeste didn't wait for a wheelchair. She rose from the bed, ignoring the ache still lingering in her healing body, and walked, one determined step at a time, toward the elevator that would finally take her back to her children. But peace, as Celeste had learned over the past agonizing week, rarely arrived without one final test. That night, as she sat beside Olivia's incubator for the first time without wires tethering her daughter's fragile body to a ventilator, a monitor's alarm suddenly pierced the quiet of the NICU, not from Olivia's station, but from Theo's, across the room. Her heart rate's dropping, a nurse called out, though it was Olivia's brother the alarm belonged to, the panic in her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "Get Dr. Bennett, now." Celeste's blood turned to ice as she spun toward Theo's incubator, watching in horror as the numbers on his monitor plummeted, his tiny chest suddenly rising and falling in short, desperate gasps. "No," she whispered, rushing toward him even as nurses converged from every direction, gently but firmly guiding her back to give them room to work. "No, no, Please. Not now. Not after everything. Dr. Bennett arrived within seconds, her calm demeanor replaced by rapid, focused urgency as she barked instructions to the team surrounding Theo's incubator. Prep for emergency intervention. I need imaging. Now. Mrs. Holloway, I need you to step back. Please, let us work. Celeste pressed herself against the far wall, her hands clasped so tightly together her knuckles turned white, watching through a blur of tears as doctors and nurses worked over her son's impossibly small body, machines beeping in frantic rhythm, voices calling out numbers and instructions she didn't understand but understood with perfect, terrifying clarity carried the weight of life and death. There were no lawyers in that room, no boardrooms, no trust documents, no corporate leverage that could save her son now. There was only a mother, pressed against a wall, praying with every fiber of her being to a God she hadn't spoken to in years, begging for one more miracle after so many had already been asked of her. Please, she whispered, over and over, tears streaming silently down her face. Please, not my baby. Please, let him live. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours, though the clock on the wall insisted only 20 had passed. And then, gradually, the frantic energy in the room began to shift. Dr. Bennett's voice softened. The numbers on the monitor steadied. The desperate rhythm of alarms slowed into something calmer, something survivable. Is stabilizing, Dr. Bennett said finally, turning toward Celeste with visible relief breaking across her exhausted face. It was a temporary complication from residual swelling, but his vitals are climbing back to normal range. Is going to be okay, Mrs. Holloway. Theo is going to be okay. Celeste's legs gave out beneath her, and she sank to the floor, sobbing with a relief so profound it felt indistinguishable from grief, and Dr. Bennett knelt beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders, letting her weep without a single word of interruption, because some moments require nothing but presence. You almost lost him, Celeste whispered. I almost lost him, and I wasn't even fighting a person this time. I was fighting nothing, just his body trying to survive. But he did survive, Dr. Bennett said gently. He survived because you never stopped fighting for him, from the very first alarm that went off the day he was born. That's not nothing, Mrs. Holloway. That's everything. 8 months later, on a bright September morning with sunlight pouring through the windows of the Sterling estate along Lake Michigan, Celeste Sterling stood on the back terrace watching her 3 children, no longer fragile newborns tethered to machines, but healthy, thriving infants, play beneath the shade of an old oak tree, their laughter carrying across the lawn like music. Sebastian's scar had faded to a thin silver line across his chest, invisible beneath his honesty, his heart beating strong and steady, the doctors calling his recovery nothing short of remarkable. Olivia had grown plump and rosy-cheeked, her lungs fully healed, her lungs filling with laughter instead of ventilator tubes. And Theo, the son who had nearly slipped away in the final hour of a war his mother fought without him even knowing it, had grown into the most curious of the 3, endlessly fascinated by the world around him, his eyes bright and alert, showing no trace of the complications that had once threatened to steal his future. Elias approached from across the lawn, 2 cups of coffee in hand, offering one to his sister as he settled into the chair beside her. The Foundation's first grant applications came in this morning, he said. 43 families requesting assistance for neonatal care they otherwise couldn't afford. Approve all of them, Celeste said without hesitation. Every single one. You know, Elias said, watching the children play, Father would be proud of what you've built. Not just the company. This. He gestured toward the children, the estate, the quiet, hard-won piece of a life rebuilt from ruins. He'd be proud of both of us, Celeste said, for finally finding each other again. 6 months into her role as executive chairwoman of Sterling Global Industries, Celeste had already restructured the company's philanthropic arm entirely, establishing the Richard Sterling Children's Foundation to provide life-saving neonatal care for families who, like she nearly had, might otherwise lose everything to a system that too often values cost over life. Adrian, meanwhile, sat in a federal detention facility awaiting trial on charges that carried the possibility of over a decade in prison, His once celebrated name now synonymous with scandal, his empire dismantled and absorbed into the very company he had once believed he controlled. Monica had struck a plea deal, testifying against Adrian in exchange for leniency, disappearing from Chicago's social scene entirely, her name mentioned now only in hushed, cautionary tones among the city's elite. And Celeste, the woman who had once been dismissed as merely a wife, merely a mother, merely an inconvenience to be managed with divorce papers on a hospital tray, now sat at the head of an empire her father had spent his life building and protecting, precisely for a day like this one. She watched her children laugh beneath the oak tree, sunlight dancing across their faces, and felt, for the first time in longer than she could remember, that the storm was finally, truly over. She had lost a husband who was never really hers to begin with. She had gained a brother she thought was dead, a legacy she never knew she carried, and a strength she never realized she possessed until the world tried to strip everything else away. And in the end, that strength was the only inheritance that had ever truly mattered. If this story moved you, if you found yourself holding your breath through every twist, make sure you smash that like button and subscribe for more stories just like this one. Drop a comment below and tell me which moment hit you hardest. Was it the divorce papers on the hospital tray, or Theo's heart stopping in the NICU? I read every single comment, and I love hearing which parts of these stories stay with you. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. I'll see you in the next story.